They said love conquers all, but what Clara faced that Sunday afternoon wasn't love. It was cruelty wrapped in expensive cologne and designer suits. Picture this: a crowded restaurant, laughter filling the air, families celebrating ordinary moments. Then suddenly silence. A man stands up, his face twisted with rage, and before anyone can react, he grabs a birthday cake and smashes it directly into his wife's face. Frosting drips down her cheeks. Chocolate smears across her faded dress. The entire room freezes. Phones come out. Whispers erupt like wildfire. And the woman just sits there, trembling, humiliated in front of strangers who will never forget her face. But here's what nobody knew that day. What happened next would flip this entire story on its head, and teach everyone in that room a lesson they'd carry for the rest of their lives. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Her name was Clara Thompson. His name was Richard Blackwell. And their story began not in luxury, but on a dusty roadside where Clara sold fresh oranges under a worn tarp, counting coins to pay for her mother's dialysis treatments. Richard saw her there one rainy evening, drenched and exhausted, and something in her quiet resilience caught his attention. He pulled over in his Mercedes, offered her a ride home, and said words she'd replay in her mind for years to come. "You deserve better than this." 6 months later, they were married. Clara thought she'd found her fairy tale. She moved into Richard's mansion, met his wealthy friends, and tried desperately to fit into a world that spoke a language she didn't understand. But behind the marble countertops and crystal chandeliers, Richard's love came with conditions. He mocked her grammar at dinner parties, corrected her posture in front of guests, and constantly reminded her that marrying him was the best thing that ever happened to her. Clara cooked his meals, ironed his shirts, and smiled through the loneliness because she believed marriage meant sacrifice. She believed love could soften even the hardest hearts. She was wrong. On Richard's 35th birthday, Clara saved every dollar from the small allowance he gave her for groceries. She wanted to surprise him, to show him she cared, to prove she could be the wife he wanted. She booked a table at Marino's, his favorite Italian restaurant, the kind of place where appetizers cost more than her weekly budget. She ordered his favorite dishes, a tiramisu cake with "Happy Birthday Richard" written in gold icing. She wore her best dress, the only one without patches, and waited nervously for him to arrive. But Richard didn't come alone. He walked in with 6 of his business associates, men in tailored suits who evaluated everything with cold, calculating eyes. Clara's stomach dropped. She hadn't planned for this. Richard barely acknowledged her as he sat down, launching into animated conversations about stock portfolios and real estate deals. His friends glanced at Clara with thinly veiled judgment. One whispered to another, loud enough for her to hear, "Is that really his wife? I thought he said he married well." The meal continued in painful silence for Clara. She picked at her food, feeling smaller with every passing minute. Then the waiter brought the bill. Clara reached for her small purse, her hands shaking slightly, and that's when her heart stopped. The wallet wasn't there. In her nervousness, she'd left it in the taxi. Panic washed over her like ice water. She looked up at Richard, her voice barely a whisper. "Richard, I think I left my wallet in the cab. I'm so sorry. Can you cover it? I'll pay you back tomorrow, I promise." The table went silent. Richard's jaw clenched. His face turned a shade of red she'd never seen before. He stood up slowly, and for a moment, Clara thought he'd just pay and they'd leave quietly. Instead, he picked up the birthday cake, the one she'd saved weeks to afford, and without a word, smashed it directly into her face. The impact stunned her. Frosting filled her nose and mouth. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. She heard gasps, chairs scraping, someone's phone camera clicking. Richard's voice cut through the chaos like glass. "This is what I get for lifting someone from the gutter? You embarrass me on my birthday? You're pathetic." He threw his napkin on the table and walked out, his friends hurrying after him, leaving Clara sitting alone, cake dripping onto her lap, surrounded by dozens of staring strangers. If you're feeling angry right now, drop a comment saying, "I'm still watching," because what Clara does next will leave you speechless. Clara sat there for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. A kind waiter brought her napkins and quietly told her the bill had been covered by an anonymous customer who'd witnessed everything. She thanked him without making eye contact, wiped her face as best she could, and walked out into the cool evening air. She didn't cry. Not yet. She walked the 3 miles back to Richard's mansion in her ruined dress, her mind strangely quiet. When she arrived, the house was dark. Richard hadn't come home. Clara went upstairs, packed a single bag with her mother's photo, 2 dresses, and the small Bible her grandmother had given her. She left her wedding ring on the nightstand with a note that said only, "I deserve better than this." Then she walked out and never looked back. Clara spent that first night in a shelter for women in crisis. The counselor there, an older woman named Miss Patricia, listened to her story without judgment and said something Clara would never forget. "Sweetheart, rock bottom isn't where you fail. It's where you decide whether to stay down or dig your way up." Clara chose to dig. She found work at a small neighborhood cafe called Rosie's Kitchen, washing dishes and mopping floors for minimum wage. The owner, a woman named Diane, noticed Clara's work ethic and eventually let her help in the kitchen. Clara had learned to cook from her grandmother, simple comfort food that made people feel at home. Diane's customers started requesting Clara's meatloaf and Clara's cornbread. Slowly, Clara began to smile again. She saved every paycheck, living in a tiny studio apartment with a leaky faucet and a mattress on the floor. Meanwhile, Richard's social media showed him at galas and yacht parties, his arm around different women, his smile as fake as his concern had ever been for Clara. But Clara wasn't watching. She was too busy planning. 8 months after leaving Richard, Clara was wiping down tables at Rosie's when she overheard 2 businessmen in suits discussing a catering problem. Their company's anniversary gala was in 2 weeks, and their caterer had just canceled. They needed someone reliable, affordable, and fast. Clara's heart pounded. She approached their table, her voice steady despite her nerves. "Excuse me, gentlemen. I couldn't help but overhear. I run a small catering service. I'd love to show you what I can do." They exchanged skeptical glances, but agreed to a tasting. Clara spent 3 days preparing a menu that showcased everything she'd learned. Herb-crusted salmon, roasted vegetables with balsamic glaze, homemade rolls that melted in your mouth, and a decadent chocolate torte. When the businessmen tasted her food, their eyes widened. "This is incredible," one said. "You're hired." That contract became Clara's turning point. She registered her business officially, calling it Grace and Grit Catering. She hired 2 other women from the shelter, giving them the same chance Miss Patricia had given her. Word spread. One event became 5, then 20. Clara's reputation grew not just for her food, but for her kindness and professionalism. Are you rooting for Clara right now? Comment below and tell us what you'd do in her situation. And don't forget to hit that like button if this story is touching your heart. Then came the invitation that changed everything. Clara received an email requesting catering for a major corporate anniversary celebration. The client was Blackwell Enterprises, Richard's company. Clara stared at her computer screen for a long time. Part of her wanted to decline, to avoid the inevitable confrontation. But another part, the part that had scrubbed floors and cried herself to sleep and rebuilt herself from nothing, wanted to face this moment head-on. She accepted the contract. The day of the event, Clara arrived early with her team, dressed in a professional chef's coat with her company logo embroidered on the chest. They set up elegant food stations, arranging everything with precision and care. As guests began arriving, Clara caught glimpses of Richard's business partners, some of the same men who'd been at that disastrous birthday dinner. They didn't recognize her. Why would they? She was no longer the broken woman in a cake-stained dress. She was Clara Thompson, CEO of Grace and Grit Catering. Then Richard walked in. Their eyes met across the room, and Clara watched the color drain from his face. He froze mid-conversation, his polished composure cracking for just a moment. Clara didn't flinch. She smiled politely and continued directing her team. Throughout the evening, guests raved about the food. The CEO of Blackwell Enterprises, a distinguished man named Mr. Harrison, personally sought Clara out to compliment her work. "Miss Thompson, this is extraordinary. We'd love to discuss a long-term partnership with your company." Clara thanked him graciously, shaking his hand with confidence. Richard stood nearby, watching the exchange, his expression unreadable. As the event wound down, Richard finally approached her, his voice low. "Clara, I didn't know you'd be here. You look different." She met his gaze calmly. "I am different, Richard. I'm the woman I should have been all along." He shifted uncomfortably. "Look, about that night at the restaurant. I was under a lot of pressure. I shouldn't have." Clara raised her hand gently, stopping him. "You're right. You shouldn't have. But I'm not here for an apology, Richard. I'm here because your company hired the best caterer in the city. That's all." She turned to leave, but Richard caught her arm. "Do you hate me?" Clara paused, considering the question honestly. "No. I don't hate you. I actually feel sorry for you. Because you have everything except the one thing that matters. Peace." She walked away, leaving Richard standing alone in his own company's celebration. Surrounded by success but drowning in regret. Think about this for a moment. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who thought they knew your worth? Drop a comment and share your story. Your experience might inspire someone watching right now. 6 months later, Grace and Grit Catering had expanded to 3 locations. Clara hired 12 employees, mostly women rebuilding their lives after hardship. She started a non-profit on the side, teaching cooking skills to people experiencing homelessness, giving them the tools to find work and dignity. Her mother's health improved with proper treatment Clara could now afford, and they spent Sundays together cooking the recipes Clara's grandmother had passed down. One afternoon, Clara received a letter. It was from Richard. Inside was a check for $20,000 and a handwritten note. "Clara, I've spent months in therapy trying to understand why I treated you so cruelly. The truth is I was terrified of my own inadequacy, so I projected it onto you. You deserved love, and I gave you contempt. I know money can't undo the harm, but please use this to help other women the way you've helped yourself. You were always stronger than I could ever be. I'm sorry." Clara read the letter twice, then folded it carefully. She deposited the check and used every penny to expand her nonprofit. She never responded to Richard, because some chapters close not with words, but with the simple act of moving forward. Today, Clara's story is told in business schools as an example of resilience and entrepreneurship. She's been featured in magazines, invited to speak at conferences, and honored by the mayor for her community work. But when people ask her about her success, she always brings it back to that moment in the restaurant. "That was the day I learned my worth wasn't determined by someone else's treatment of me," she says. "My value was always there. I just had to remember it." And Richard? Last anyone heard, he'd stepped back from his company, sold most of his assets, and moved to a small coastal town. Some say he volunteers at a community center. Others say he's still trying to figure out who he is without the money and status. Either way, his path and Clara's no longer cross. Here's what we want you to think about today. How many of us stay in situations that diminish us because we're afraid of starting over? How many of us let one person's cruelty define our entire story? Clara's journey teaches us that rock bottom can be a foundation if we choose to build on it instead of sink into it. Humiliation can be a turning point if we refuse to let it be our ending. And sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's becoming so focused on your own growth that the person who hurt you becomes irrelevant to your story. Before we end, we want to hear from you. If you were in Clara's position, could you have walked away? Would you have forgiven Richard? Or would the anger have consumed you? And here's the deeper question. When life humiliates you, do you let it break you or remake you? Comment below. Share your thoughts. Your story matters, and someone watching needs to hear it. If this video moved you, if Clara's story reminded you of your own strength or inspired you to make a change, do us a favor. Hit that subscribe button. Share this video with someone who needs to remember their worth. And check out our other stories of real people overcoming impossible odds. Because here's the truth we want you to carry with you. You are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to become after it happens. Clara chose grace over bitterness. She chose growth over revenge. She chose herself when everyone else had counted her out. And that choice made all the difference. Thank you for watching. Remember, your pain has purpose. Your struggle has meaning. And your comeback will always be stronger than your setback. We'll see you in the next video. Keep fighting. Keep rising. Keep becoming.